Snow crusted on the wind like powdered glass, carried in ragged gusts that bit through wool and leather alike. The prairie stretched empty in every direction, a flat white wasteland broken only by a lone cottonwood and a dark shape huddled at its base. The shape barely moved, just a tremor, a shiver that might have been the wind itself, until the rider drew close enough to see a woman's arm, thin as kindling, clutching a bundle to her chest. Clay Hartman reined in his mare, boots creaking in the stirrups as he leaned forward. He'd been out checking fence lines, a chore made longer by the drifts piling against the posts, when he'd spotted her. First just a smudge on the horizon, then a figure slumped against the tree like she'd been poured out of the storm. She was young, maybe mid-20s, though the cold and exhaustion had carved her face down to sharp edges. Her lips were blue, her eyes half-lidded, and in her arms, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, was a baby so still that for one awful second Clay thought it was already gone. Then the child's tiny chest fluttered, a weak gasp breaking through the howling wind. Clay swung out of the saddle, snow crunching under his boots. "Ma'am," he called, voice rough from the cold. No answer, just that same tremor, her fingers tightening around the bundle like she'd fight the devil himself before letting go. He crouched beside her, brushing frost from her lashes. "You're gonna freeze out here." Her eyes cracked open. They were dark, fever-bright, and fixed on him like she was seeing more than just a stranger. Her lips parted, voice rasping out through the chapped skin. "He took the others," she whispered. "I saved this one." Clay's stomach nodded. There were questions in that sentence he wasn't sure he wanted answers to, not here in the middle of a killing wind. He shifted, lifting her arm over his shoulder, feeling how light she was, too light. "Come on," he muttered. "We're getting you out of this." The baby gave a weak whimper as Clay hauled them both toward the horse. The mare stamped nervously, breath steaming, but Clay swung the woman up onto the saddle and climbed up behind her, wrapping one arm around her to keep her from sliding off. The bundle was pressed between them, a fragile warmth against his chest. He turned the mare toward the distant smudge of his ranch house, half buried in snow, and kicked her into a hard gallop. By the time they reached the barn, Clay's fingers were too numb to untie the reins. He shoved the door open, snow spilling in behind them, and staggered inside. The sudden quiet was deafening after the wind, just the soft rustle of hay and the mare's harsh breathing. Clay lowered the woman onto a bed of straw near the wall, pulling his coat around her while he checked the baby. Tiny lips moved weakly, searching, the eyes fluttering but not opening. Clay cursed under his breath. He sprinted for the house, grabbed every blanket he could find, and returned to wrap them both. He lit a lantern, the glow flickering over her face. Ashen now, but still conscious. She was watching him, pupils wide, like she was weighing whether or not to trust him. "You're safe," he said, though it felt like a lie. "Name's Clay Hartman. You're on my land now, and no one's gonna hurt you." Her throat worked like she wanted to answer, but only a hoarse sound came out. She closed her eyes again, a single tear freezing at the corner before it could fall. Clay sat back on his heels, running a hand down his face. He wasn't the kind of man folks came to for help. He kept to himself, out where the land was quiet, where his own ghosts didn't follow as loud. But now there was a woman and her baby half dead in his barn, and whatever story brought them here had teeth. Outside, the wind eased for just a moment, the silence pressing in heavy. Clay glanced at the lantern, its glow painting shadows across the wooden beams, and felt the weight of the decision already settling on his shoulders. He could ride into town at first light, bring the sheriff out here, and wash his hands of it. Folks would say it wasn't his problem. They'd be right. But as he looked at that bundle, at the faint rise and fall of the child's chest, he knew he wasn't leaving them. Not tonight, maybe not ever. The woman's fingers stirred, brushing weakly at the baby's face. Her eyes opened again, just enough to find his. "Don't let him," she rasped. "Don't let him take this one too." Her hand fell limp. Clay stared at her, heart pounding. Whoever he was, he'd already taken enough. and Clay Hartman wasn't about to let the last of her fight go to waste. He pulled the blankets tighter around them, settled back against the stall wall, and listened to the wind rise again outside, like the land itself was holding its breath. By morning, the storm had spent itself, leaving behind a world muted in white. Clay stepped out of the barn, breath clouding the frigid air, and saw the sun just cresting the horizon, pale and cold. The house was a few paces away, with siding half buried in snowdrifts, but the barn felt warmer than any hearth could. He wasn't about to leave them alone. Inside, the woman stirred under the pile of blankets. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy but more alert than last night. Clay knelt beside her, setting down a tin cup of steaming broth. "Try this," he said, keeping his voice low. She struggled to lift her head, so Clay steadied her while she sipped, each swallow slow, deliberate. When she eased back, he caught the faintest whisper. "Thank you." Her voice was still raw, but the words were clear. She looked down at the bundle nestled beside her, the baby swaddled now in Clay's own shirt for lack of anything better. The child gave a weak cry, a good sign, Clay hoped, and she pressed a trembling hand to its cheek. Clay studied her face in the morning light, realizing just how young she looked beneath the weariness. Too young to be out here alone with a child. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena," she murmured. Her eyes flicked up to his. "Yours?" "Clay Hartman. My place is a few miles outside Dry Creek." He hesitated before asking, "You got family?" Her lips parted, then closed again. Her gaze drifted away, out toward the barn door as if she could see through the wood. "No," she whispered finally. "Not anymore." Clay let the silence stretch. Whatever had happened to her, she wasn't ready to speak it out loud. And maybe he didn't need to know. Not yet. By midday, Clay had the mare saddled. "I'm riding into town," he told her. "Need to fetch a doctor, some food, maybe warmer clothes for the little one." Lena's face paled, her fingers tightening around the bundle. "No," she said sharply, sharper than he'd heard her speak yet. Don't tell anyone. Please." Clay frowned. "Lena, you need help. That baby does too." She shook her head, a spark of fear in her eyes. "If they know, he'll find us." Clay straightened, jaw tight. "Who?" Her lips trembled. "The man who took the others. He won't stop. If folks talk, he'll know where I am." Clay's chest tightened. Whoever she'd run from, she believed every word of that warning. He thought of Dry Creek, of the way folks in town looked at outsiders, especially a half-dead woman carrying a child that wasn't born of a respectable marriage. Gossip would spread like fire in dry grass. And if this man had power enough to take her children, maybe he had reach out here too. Still, Clay couldn't ignore the risk. "You stay here," he said finally. "I'll get what we need, but I'll keep my mouth shut." The ride into town was quiet, the world muffled under snow. When Clay reached Dry Creek, the usual cluster of townsfolk stood outside the general store, boots crunching in the hard-packed street. They greeted him with nods, some tipping hats, but Clay gave only curt replies. He was a familiar figure, broad-shouldered, weathered, a man who kept to himself. Inside the store, he gathered flour, beans, dried meat, cloth for swaddling. Mrs. Calloway, the storekeeper's wife, eyed the pile. "Stocking up for winter?" she asked, voice curious. "Something like that," Clay muttered. She glanced at him, then at the fabric. "That there's for babies," she said, a little too pointed. Clay didn't answer. He paid, loaded the supplies, and rode out before the questions could start piling. By the time he returned, Lena was propped against the stall wall, humming softly to the child. Her face eased when she saw him, relief so deep it startled him. He handed her the food, showed her the cloth for swaddling. She touched it like it was spun gold. "You didn't tell them," she said quietly. "No," Clay replied, hanging his hat. "I didn't." For a moment, they just looked at each other. Clay realized he'd made a choice without saying it out loud. He was keeping them here, hidden, safe, for however long it took. That night, as wind rattled the loose boards, Clay sat by the lantern light while Lena fed the baby. Her hands shook, but her touch was steady. After a while, she spoke without looking up. "I had 3, she said softly. 3 little ones. He took them when I couldn't pay. Said it was law." Her voice broke, just a fraction. "I ran. Couldn't take them all. I saved this one." Clay didn't move, didn't speak. The weight of her words pressed against the barn walls, heavy and suffocating. He'd seen what men could do under the guise of law. He'd done things himself he couldn't take back. "You did what you could," he said finally, his voice low but firm. Lena nodded, though her eyes were wet. "But he'll come. He always does." Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, the sound sharp and lonely across the plains. Clay's hand settled on the rifle leaning against the wall. Let him come, he thought grimly. But when the time came, it wouldn't just be his fight. 2 days passed in a fragile rhythm. Clay tending the stock and chopping wood, Lena gaining strength slowly, her baby crying louder now, which Clay took as a good sign. But the peace felt thin, like a crust of ice over a fast river. On the 3rd morning, Clay woke before dawn to the sound of distant hoofbeats. Faint at first, then steadier. Too many to be travelers. Too early for ranch hands moving cattle. He sat up in the barn loft, eyes narrowing, and slid the rifle from its rack. Through a gap in the boards, he saw them. A dark line of riders on the horizon, maybe half a dozen, cutting through the snow with grim purpose. Clay climbed down, boots landing soft on the straw. Lena was awake, clutching the baby, her eyes wide. "They're coming," she whispered. He didn't ask how she knew. She didn't look surprised, only terrified in a way that felt practiced. "Stay in here. Don't make a sound." Clay's voice was calm, almost too calm, as he checked the rifle. "I'll handle it, Clay." But he was already moving, stepping out into the frozen morning. The riders came fast, hoofs thudding in unison. As they neared, Clay could make out details. Dusty coats, rifles in scabbards, and at the center, a man in a black duster, his posture too upright, too clean. Power clung to him like a second skin. The group slowed as they reached the yard, snow kicking up in pale clouds. The man in black tipped his hat with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he said, voice smooth as polished steel. "I'm looking for a woman, mid-20s, dark hair. She's got something that belongs to me." Clay leaned against a fence post, rifle in hand but not raised. "Ain't seen anyone like that," he said evenly. The man's gaze slid past Clay to the barn. "Funny thing, folks in town said you were buying supplies you don't usually need. Swaddling cloth, milk powder." Clay's grip tightened, but his face stayed blank. "That's my business." "Sure." The man smiled again, colder this time. "Name's Cyrus Hale. Those kids she ran off with, my kids. By law, they're mine." Clay's jaw flexed. "By law? She owed me. Couldn't pay. Debt's a chain, Mr. Hartman. You know how it works." Behind Hale, one of his men spat in the snow. Another shifted in the saddle, glancing at Clay like he'd rather not be here. Clay said nothing. Hale tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Now, I got men with me who don't mind looking around if you won't talk. But I'd rather this be easy." Inside the barn, Lena held the baby tight, rocking without sound. Every creak of the wood made her flinch. Clay finally spoke. "There's no woman here," he said flatly. "You can turn around now." Hale's smile vanished. He nudged his horse forward, close enough that Clay could see the faint scar under his eye. "You sure you want to make this your problem?" Clay didn't answer. He just met Hale's gaze, steady as bedrock. The standoff stretched, the cold air sharp between them. The riders shifted, hands brushing gun grips, the tension so tight it hummed. Finally, Hale sat back, smirking. "Fine, we'll be back." He turned his horse with a sharp tug, his men wheeling behind him. "But you think on what happens when you shelter thieves, Hartman. Law don't look kindly on it." They rode off, the hoofbeats fading slow. Clay stayed by the fence until they were specks on the horizon, then until the horizon was empty. Only then did he lower the rifle. Inside, Lena's face was pale, lips pressed tight. "He'll be back," she whispered. Clay nodded once. "I know." That night, the ranch was too quiet. Even the wind felt like it was holding its breath. Clay sat by the lantern, cleaning the rifle slow and deliberate. Lena watched him, the baby asleep against her chest. "You could still turn us in," she said softly. "He'd leave you be." Clay looked up, eyes dark and steady. "Maybe, but I ain't in the habit of handin' people to men like him." Lena held his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Fear, gratitude, and the weight of a choice neither of them could take back now. Far off, coyotes cried into the night, their howls echoing across the frozen plains. The danger hadn't passed. It was just waiting for the right time. The following morning, frost glittered like shards of glass across the prairie. Clay moved through the barn quietly, careful not to wake Lena or the baby. He spread hay for the mare, checked the chickens, then stepped outside. The horizon was clear, but that didn't comfort him. Men like Hale didn't give up. When he returned, Lena was awake, sitting cross-legged with the baby cradled in her lap. Her face was softer in the pale light, though shadows still clung beneath her eyes. She looked at Clay as if working up the courage to speak. "You don't know what he's done," she said at last, voice low but steady. Clay leaned against the stall door. "Then tell me." Her gaze fell to the baby, her fingers stroking its tiny hand. "I married young. My husband died 2 winters back, left me with 3 mouths to feed and no land of my own. Cyrus Hale came with promises, help, shelter, work. I believed him." Her jaw tightened. "But every dollar he lent, every scrap of food he counted. Said I owed him. And when I couldn't pay, he took my children as labor. Called it lawful. Called it fair." Clay's stomach turned. He'd heard of men like Hale, ranchers who used debt like a whip, trapping the desperate until they were no better than slaves. "I tried to fight," Lena continued. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "I begged. He told me I could earn them back if I did what he wanted. When I refused, he said I'd lost every right to be their mother." The silence after her words was heavy. Clay's hand tightened on the rail until his knuckles whitened. "How'd you get away?" he asked. "One night, he sent me to another man, said I'd start working off my debt." Her eyes glistened, but her voice didn't shake. "I took the baby and ran. Couldn't carry the others. Couldn't." Her breath hitched, the weight of it breaking through for the first time. "I thought I'd die out there. Maybe I was supposed to." Clay stepped closer, crouching down in front of her. "You ain't dying here," he said softly. Lena met his eyes, searching for something in his face. Whatever she found there made her shoulders ease, just a fraction. "You don't even know us," she whispered. Clay looked at the baby, small and warm against her chest. "Don't need to." The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Clay watched Lena soothe it with practiced hands. There was something in the way she touched the child, gentle but fierce, like she was holding the last piece of her world together. It reminded him of his own mother years ago, before the fever took her, before everything went dark. "What's the baby's name?" he asked quietly. Lena's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Hope," she said. "I named her Hope." Clay nodded, understanding more than she knew. Hope was a dangerous thing out here, where the land was hard and men were harder. But maybe that's what made it worth protecting. The days that followed settled into a careful routine. Clay worked the ranch, mending fences and tending stock, while Lena recovered her strength. She helped where she could, cooking simple meals, mending his torn shirts, keeping the barn tidy. The baby, Hope, grew stronger too, her cries louder and more frequent, which Clay took as a good sign. But the peace was fragile. Every distant sound made them both freeze. A horse's whinny, the creak of wood in the wind, the call of a hawk overhead. They were waiting, both of them, for the other shoe to drop. It came on a gray afternoon, when the sky hung low and heavy with the promise of more snow. Clay was splitting wood behind the house when he heard it, the thunder of hoofbeats, closer this time, coming fast. He dropped the axe and ran for the barn, bursting through the door to find Lena already on her feet. Hope clutched tight against her chest. Her face was white, eyes wide with terror. "How many?" she whispered. Clay peered through a gap in the boards. "More than before. Maybe a dozen." This time, Hale hadn't come to talk. The riders spread out as they approached, surrounding the house and barn in a loose circle. Clay could see the glint of rifles, the hard set of their faces. These weren't just hired hands. They were men who'd done this before, men who knew how to corner prey. Hale himself rode up to the barn door, his black duster flapping in the wind. He didn't dismount this time, just sat his horse like a king surveying his domain. "Hartman!" he called out, voice carrying across the yard. "I know she's in there. Send her out and we'll call it even." Clay stepped into the doorway, rifle in hand. "I told you before. There's no one here." Hale's smile was cold as winter. "You're a poor liar, Hartman. My men saw smoke from your chimney at odd hours. Heard a baby crying on the wind. You think I'm a fool?" Behind Clay, Lena pressed herself against the back wall, Hope silent in her arms. The baby seemed to sense the danger, her tiny body tense and still. "Even if there was someone here," Clay said evenly, "they'd be under my protection. This is my land." "Your land." Hale laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the barn walls. "You think that matters? I've got the law on my side, Hartman. That woman stole from me. That child belongs to me. You're harboring fugitives." "The only fugitive I see," Clay said, raising his rifle slightly, "is a man who steals children and calls it justice." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Hale's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving to their weapons. Clay could feel the weight of their eyes on him, calculating, measuring. "Last chance," Hale said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the distance. "Send them out or we'll come in and get them." Clay's answer was to level his rifle at Hale's chest. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Hale raised his hand, and his men began to move. The first shot came from the left, splintering the wood near Clay's head. He dove back into the barn as more shots followed, the air filling with the crack of rifles and the whine of bullets. Lena screamed, clutching Hope tighter, and Clay crawled to the back of the barn where they huddled. "Stay down," he shouted over the gunfire. "Don't move." He belly crawled to a gap in the boards and returned fire, his shots careful and measured. He wasn't trying to kill. Not yet, just keep them at bay. But he could see them moving closer, using the outbuildings for cover, tightening the noose. A bullet punched through the wall near his head, showering him with splinters. Another shattered a lantern, sending oil spreading across the straw. Clay's heart hammered as he realized what they were doing. They weren't just trying to flush him out. They were trying to burn him out. "Clay!" Lena's voice was high with panic. "They're going to set the barn on fire." He could smell smoke now, see the orange glow creeping along the walls. The horses in the stalls were screaming, kicking at their doors. Clay made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "We're going out the back," he said, crawling to where Lena crouched. "There's a gully behind the barn. If we can reach it, we might have a chance." Lena's eyes were wide with terror, but she nodded. "What about Hope? You keep her quiet no matter what. Our lives depend on it." Clay kicked open the back door of the barn, smoke billowing out around them. The gully was 50 yards away, 50 yards of open ground with nowhere to hide. But it was their only chance. "Now," he whispered. They ran. The shouts started immediately, followed by the crack of rifles. Clay felt a bullet tug at his sleeve, another kick up dirt at his feet. Beside him, Lena stumbled but kept running. Hope pressed against her chest. The gully seemed impossibly far away, the ground stretching endlessly before them. Then they were tumbling down the slope, rolling into the muddy bottom of the wash. Clay pulled them both against the far bank, gasping for breath. Above them, he could hear Hale's men shouting, their boots pounding across the yard. "Find them!" Hale's voice carried on the wind. "They can't have gone far." Clay looked at Lena, saw the determination in her eyes despite the fear. Hope was silent, as if she understood that their lives hung in the balance. "There's a line shack about 2 miles downstream," Clay whispered. "If we follow the gully, we might make it before they think to look there." Lena nodded, adjusting her grip on the baby. "Lead the way." They moved like ghosts through the gathering dusk, following the twisting path of the wash. Behind them, the barn burned like a beacon against the darkening sky, and Clay knew there was no going back. Whatever happened now, they were in it together, him, Lena, and the baby named Hope. The land stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving. But for the first time since this all began, Clay felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like he was fighting for something that mattered. The line shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was shelter. Clay got a small fire going while Lena fed Hope, the baby's soft sounds the only noise in the cramped space. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie, carrying with it the distant sound of horses and men. "They'll keep looking," Lena said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Clay nodded, checking his rifle for the 100th time. "Hale's not the type to give up easy. What happens when they find us?" Clay met her eyes across the flickering firelight. "They won't." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but it was all he had to offer. Outside, the night pressed in around them, full of dangers both seen and unseen. But inside the little shack, with the fire crackling and Hope sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, Clay felt something he'd almost forgotten. He felt like he was home,